The video you are about to watch is from an old woodworking magazine that I published during the years of 2003 to approximately 2006. This was a very unique magazine. It was purely video content and it was distributed on DVDs. The magazine ran for approximately 3.5 years, and then due to financial concerns, we simply had to terminate the magazine. We moved on to other things over the last roughly 15 years. However, there has been a request to resurrect this content, so I've gone through the trouble to get the equipment, the products, everything I needed in order to bring this content back to life to share with everyone. Here on this YouTube channel, we'll be putting up approximately 100 to 120 of the original stories that appeared in that magazine. The magazine was called Woodworking at Home Magazine, and it was truly one of a kind in the world. I really hope you enjoy these videos, and please tell your friends about them.
Welcome to What a Relief. I'm Dave Reilly. What we're going to do on this issue is to discuss the development and where you're going to get your ideas for your projects. In the recent articles that we've had the projects all drawn out already. They were small, fairly uncomplicated, but now I think it's time that we get into something a little bit bigger. The first question is, of course, where do I get a project? Where do I get my ideas? Well, there's a lot of published drawings out there specifically for wood carving. Those are very good. They tell you everything you need to know, and you can get started right away. There are other sources. You can look in magazines, you can look in photographs, newspapers, and you can get to your ideas strictly from your own mind. Sometimes you have an idea that from looking at 2 or 3 different subjects, something might be very nice and carvable. So we're going to examine the process of getting that, developing it into a good working drawing, and then going ahead and doing the carving. So what we're going to do in this series, we're starting a 3-part series, a little bit different than we've had before. And this is going to be, the subject is going to be an iris. And this is essentially what the project is going to be. But first I want to tell you how I developed this carving and went through all of the design problems that I had to solve before I could start my carving. Now, the original carving was designed to be just a freestanding carving, and it looks very nice. But then we got the idea that perhaps this would be a nice carving to go into a panel in a door. So this would be an alternative use for this carving. I think it's going to look very nice. I received the carving pattern from my teacher, and when I went ahead and carved it, it turned out to be very nice. I had no problems with it. But after a while of looking at it, I decided there were some changes that I would like to make. So I started to work on that. So what you're going to see from the pattern that you'll receive with this issue will be slightly different in small details from the picture that you have right now. Now, the first thing I worked with was my master. This is what I got from my teacher. The important thing is when you have your original, don't do anything to it. Always make copies of it. You want to keep this as is with no modifications, because this is your final record. So what I use is this ordinary tracing paper. You can get this at any office supply, art supply store. And I made as accurate a tracing as I could. Now, if it's a very small drawing, 8.5 by 11, or maybe a little larger, of course you can use a copy machine. That's fine. But generally my carvings are beyond the scope of a copy machine, so I have to do it this way. So I will have made an original, taken the original, and I have made a copy. And so now this will be my working drawing. Now, if you are developing a carving from your own imagination and not using any other published, what I suggest is you do all of your sketching on a lined pad of paper. This one has the 1/4 inch grids. Do all of your sketching on that. Then when you have arrived at what you want in your design, you already have this laid out on a grid. And in a few moments I'll show you how you'll use that grid to enlarge or, in some cases, reduce the drawing and keep it exactly in the correct scale. After working for this, getting it the way I wanted, I continued making modifications. Again, keep retracing each copy. What's very nice is you can, with it in the under the tracing paper, you can do your tracing, and then you can make any new changes that you might find as necessary without having to change the original. Then, when you remove that piece, then you will have your modifications made where you can keep making copy after copy after copy. Here's another change, a few more changes. Occasionally what I will do, if there's a lot of modeling in the final carving, I'll sketch in and just shade in areas to remind me that those are rather deeply cut. Now, after I have arrived at my final design, I may make even a color drawing of it from the tracing. And what I do here, in this case, the red background, very faint here, that represents the lowest level of my drawing. There's some little green areas on the drawing. Those represent the highest level of the carving. The yellow in here and some of the black are intermediate layers. It's good to work out the different layers in a relief carving before you start carving. It's very easy to end up carving the wrong layer or to the wrong depth if you haven't planned well ahead. The next step is to produce my absolute final drawing, my final version. Again, now this is an archived copy. This one will be kept and never modified. The final one, I use a very fine marking pen, the ultra-fine or very fine styles, so that I'm not doing it in pencil, there's no smudging, and this becomes a nice final copy. The final step is, from this copy, I will make what I refer to as my working drawing on a little heavier paper. This is the one that will be glued to my wood and for my carving. I don't usually use tracing or carbon paper or other transfer paper. It has a tendency to smudge, the lines get obliterated. I prefer to glue my page down onto the wood and then cut around it. So what I'm going to do now is make a little detour, and we'll talk about how we are going to use grids to enlarge or to reduce your patterns as necessary. All right, now for this demonstration of how to enlarge or, if necessary, reduce your pattern by use of a grid, I'm not using the iris. It's much more too complicated for this demonstration. So I've taken here the end of a ribbon, a banner. It's actually one that I'm actually carving these days. And I had to work out the shape and the curve that I wanted. Now the first thing I did was, and as I mentioned before, I drew it out and roughed out until I got the design I wanted on graph paper. This way that once I had what I wanted, I already had a grid, basis of a grid on the paper. The next thing I did was, then I decided what size grid would be necessary for it. In this case, the size seemed to indicate about a half-inch square grid, which I've drawn in red here to make it a little bit more visible. I then number them, both the horizontal and the vertical axis. I'm sure a lot of you are starting to remember high school math where you had to do all of those graph problems. Well, now you can apply some of the things you have learned in high school. The next thing is to decide what size I wanted. For this example, I'm going to double this size. So what that means is I have to have a new graph drawn. Instead of half-inch squares, I'm going to have 1-inch squares. So let me show you that. Now here is my new graph drawn. These have 1-inch squares, the same number of squares horizontally and vertically. The numbering system is the same. Now it's simply a matter of looking at my original and finding where each line, the intersection where they cross, and start transferring the data. You may notice that there's a very light pencil line here that I've already started. It's really important to do it in pencil first, because inevitably you're going to miscount your numbers or your lines, and you're going to make some mistakes, and there's going to be a lot of erasure. I've already done that now, so I have enough courage to use a marking pen so that you'll be able to see it a lot better. So you can start anywhere. It makes no difference. Arbitrarily, I have started over here in this corner at the intersection of 8 and my first line. So I would start there, and I will simply follow the line and see where it crosses intersections and start essentially connecting all of these intersections. So from here, it crosses about between the upper corner here of 7. It goes down to 2 and 6, and then comes across. Then looking at my original, I see it comes back about in the middle of 2 and 3 on the 5 line, crosses here and goes almost to the intersection of 1 and 4, and it ends a little bit below the 4. And I just continue along. It's almost like connecting the dots. In this case, we're simply connecting the lines. This curve sweeps around until it gets to the intersection of 3 and 4. You could label one axis with letters instead of numbers. I just, out of habit, I use the numbers. This continues on to the intersection of 4 and at 7. And we continue on, checking each point and connecting where these lines come across. I can go back to where 8 starts and comes to almost to the top of 7, goes straight across, just a little under this intersection, crosses over. It goes through this intersection of 9 and 5. Again, it comes across, almost catches the top of 7, swings down, starts back down at 8, goes through this intersection of 9 and 9, and it continues on. And in no time at all, following these, picking off each one, again, better do it in pencil, or else you're going to have problems. In this design, I am going to have a small border around on the inside, about 3/8 of an inch in on the large size original. Although actually, in reality, I would have enlarged this by only 50%. This is larger than the one I'm actually carving, but just for the sake of demonstration and for visibility, I've made it a lot larger. And now I have an exact copy of my original, double size and correct proportion. And from this, I can make a pattern for cutting out my material. I won't go into all the different details and subtleties. You could make the, in this case, perhaps the vertical lines at 1 inch and the horizontal at 1.5 inches. The width would be the same, but you will be able to stretch out the design. So you can change its proportion as much as its actual size. As long as you have taken your original, whether it was from a photograph, a published drawing, and so on, trace it out on tracing paper until you get it the way you want, draw your grid across it, and then you can start and make your design. The design that you will see in your issue of the magazine, you will notice it does have marks all around it for the grid, so that when you download it and make a print, you can draw your grid lines across, fill it in, and then you can develop it into whatever size that you want. That's really all there is to it. Now, this method of using the grids may appear to be pretty labor intensive, and it could be. However, the other approach is to take it to a copy center or to a regular copy machine, and you can have it enlarged, which works very, very well. There's really no problem with it, except you must remember that the lines will be increased in size as the drawing does, so that if you have a very great enlargement, you may end up with lines that are quite thick, and it'll require for you to redraw it to get fine lines. Now, you must remember that this method of using grids is not restricted just to wood carving. Marquetry, scroll saw, any type of project that you have where you have a design that has to be enlarged or reduced. You could take a larger drawing and reduce it down to a smaller size. This is applicable to all these different activities. If you should happen to want to make a carving the size of a barn, you can make it as large as you want. Now, getting back to our iris design, this is that working copy that I have. This is the one that we're going to use to make our carving from. In this case, I will simply cut it out and it'll be glued down to the wood. I don't use tracing paper or transfer paper. I prefer just to glue this down. You can use the spray adhesive or any way you want to glue it down. It's all going to be carved away anyway. So it makes a much sharper image, and it makes an image that's much easier to follow. Now, this completes the first section of this project. We've looked at how we find designs and have developed them by means of tracing and developing and making any modifications that are necessary. We did make a slight diversion where I talked about using a grid to enlarge or to reduce your carvings. And then finally, we take our master carving that we have here, gluing it to our wood, and it'll be all prepared to go. So that completes this. We will see you again in the next issue where we'll do the actual carving. Thank you, and this is Dave Reilly. Hope to see you again.
I sincerely hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you truly enjoyed it, please help us share this information with the rest of the communities. Please hit the subscribe button, give us a big thumbs up, and be sure to tell your friends about this channel. Thanks again for watching.